Today on the Melbourne Report, 50 million and still counting. Tony Mokbel accused of mocking the legal system, and we're the ones paying. She's in Australia, and next week she's in Melbourne. But how have times changed for the Queen's visit? And speaking of old times, and Melbourne's horse and carriages about to be forced out of the city. On Sky News and the Melbourne Channel, the Melbourne Report begins now.
From the Sky News Melbourne studios in South Bank, this is the Melbourne Report with Ahron Young.
Hello and welcome to the program. Also today, Occupy Wall Street fails to occupy our hearts and minds in Melbourne. Is there any need for a protest like this in Australia? We'll have more on that later in the show. But first to this week's panel, the Herald Sun social media editor Isabelle Oderberg, Channel 9 Melbourne's chief newsreader Peter Hitchener, and media lawyer Justin Quill. But we begin today with Tony Mokbel. There are so many allegations, so many charges, that it almost defies belief that Mokbel could now be allowed to change his plea to not guilty in the Victorian Supreme Court. He pleaded guilty in April to masterminding the so-called company while he was on the run from Australia. And with millions in assets not yet seized, he's now been granted more legal aid. It's already cost us $50 million. His lawyer, Peter Farris QC, told the court this week, this is a fraud on the criminal justice system by Victoria Police. The attempt by the prosecution to shut out any investigation reeks of suspicion. The prosecution hit back with this very quickly, even at its highest. This is a hopeless application. Isabelle, I'll start with you. How do you think the public will be looking at this, everything that's happening in court this week?
Look, I think the public obviously is concerned by the idea that Mokbel is accessing legal aid, given the cost of actually repatriating him back to Australia to face the charges. And I think that they're looking to have faith in the justice system that he is, having to answer for, the allegations that he's facing. Is
he mocking the system, would you say? I mean, here's a man who has a lot of assets, we're being told, that haven't yet been discovered, and yet at the same time we've got a situation where he's now applying for legal aid. Well,
look, I might be the daughter of two lawyers, but I'm certainly not a practicing lawyer, and perhaps not qualified to talk at great length about the. Is it call a friend, sort of? But Justin obviously will speak to the system and whether it's being made a mockery of. But I think that really, that the public is looking for justice. They're looking for him to be answerable, and I think that they are concerned that this has already been an extremely costly exercise and that it shouldn't blow out any more than it already has.
Peter, what are your thoughts on this? Obviously, you've been presenting a lot of stories in regards to this over the past couple of years. You watched things change, another twist this week. What were your thoughts?
It reminded me of some of the earlier prosecutions, recent fairly high-profile cases that didn't go ahead for what seemed like procedural matters, and when the issue of swearing of affidavits and whether or not they were done correctly, that sort of thing, it brought to mind the possibility that somehow or other there was a way round this case proceeding, another loophole, and I think if that were to happen, there would be outrage, because I think people certainly have followed the case. A lot of money's been invested in it, and if it doesn't sort of go somewhere, I think the public will be mightily disappointed. And of course, there's already a great deal of dissatisfaction with the sentencing. From what we read in the papers, a lot of people aren't happy with the sentences handed down. So I think there's probably some public concern about these issues.
Justin, you're almost like a family lawyer on the show these days. I saw you in court at the Supreme Court. I think it was on Wednesday when all this was playing out. You were representing the Herald and Weekly Times. What were your thoughts on what was happening there?
The Herald and Weekly Times and Channel 9 as well, I might say. Look, I don't think it's making a mockery of the system at all. People should be allowed to bring these applications. I don't have a problem with him being able to actually say to the court, I would like a jury trial. I'd have a real concern.
Does it pay his lawyers' bills?
Well, maybe that too, but I'd have a real concern if the application was successful. That would make a mockery of the system, but the fact that he's allowed to ask a judge, I don't think there's a problem. At the end of the day, I think we can all be pretty comfortable that Tony Mokbel's not going to be getting out of jail anytime soon. So that's the main thing.
What do you think his plan is here? We were trying to flowchart it out if he is able to question the affidavits, and then of course we heard from the prosecutor who was saying, I mean, even if he is able to get around the affidavits, there's still the issue of 3030, who's the witness who tipped them off. There's still the fact that there's a telephone intercept. What is the point of all this?
Well, if the telephone intercepts effectively don't exist, if the affidavits weren't sworn properly, then the jury in, let's say, 12 months, maybe 2 years, don't get to hear about the telephone intercept.
But it's only one small part, though, isn't it?
Well, exactly. So what he's hoping for, I imagine, is that he can cut himself a better deal if he knocks those. It's like a negotiation between him and the prosecution. He's already done the deal, but now he's wanting to renegotiate and say, if you take those telephone intercepts off.
So let me get this right. Let me get this right for the audience, because this is what we were thinking during the week. Let's play it out to exactly how they are looking at it. And you have a situation now where you have a man who has come up with a deal after coming back to Australia, having fled, and this deal that is made with the authorities back in April, he now wants to move away from that deal because he's seen a little loophole that he might be able to use. Is that what we're seeing here?
Yeah, and so what we're seeing is he's not hoping to move away from it and get out of jail. That's not what he's thinking. What he's thinking is he can do a better deal and get a lesser sentence. That's ultimately what he's trying to do. And the reason he thinks he might be able to do that is because the weaker their case, the weaker the prosecution case, the better the deal he can cut. So if he can knock the telephone intercepts out, he'll be able to negotiate a better deal. I might say it's so unlikely that these affidavits were not sworn properly. The affidavits that aren't sworn properly are generally done by, with all due respect to them, suburban coppers.
Sure.
These guys who are were running the Piranha Task Force.
All the effort they went through, they were not going to make any
Correct.
mistakes.
These are the best of the best in terms of the Victoria Police Force. So we're talking about Piranha Task Force. They're not going to have mucked this up. So when it all comes out, the application will be denied, I think.
Well, dust off the china and practice your curtsy, because next Wednesday the Queen comes to Melbourne. But first, have a look at this picture taken back in April 1970 as the Queen moves, and her parade, of course, moves down Collins Street past the Australia Hotel. There was a real sense of pageantry and importance, as you can see from that photograph. But only 400 people greeted Her Majesty in Canberra this week. So how will Melbourne greet the Queen next week? Peter Hitchener, I'll start with you as someone who perhaps has a bit of perspective over a number of Queen visits. How do you think it will play out this time compared to in the past?
Well, I think the royal family is very good at charm offensives, and I think this is just the latest in a long line of them. Back in 1954, when the Queen arrived, the Queen and Prince Philip came to Australia, there was huge interest. There were massive crowds wherever they went. And of course, those crowds have dwindled over the years. But the visits have kept on coming, and despite a few little scandals back home, they're very good when they're on the road meeting people, pressing the flesh, however many people there are to press the flesh with. But I think that the fact that we are now living in an age of celebrity means that there will be lots of kids coming out to see the Queen. It doesn't mean that they're going to become monarchists as a result. I think it's just because people are interested in her, people like her. But there's always a royal tour of some kind happening. William was here earlier in the year meeting flood victims and bushfire survivors and doing the, sort of having a kick of an AFL footy, and it didn't go very far, and he had a bowl of a cricket ball, and that didn't go very far either, but never mind, everyone loved it. It was all good fun.
And John Howard wasn't a great cricketer, but became Prime Minister.
Exactly. So, and you might remember that William himself was first introduced to the Australian community on a royal tour, held up for the photographers back in the 80s sometime, when Charles and Diana were here on one of their many royal tours. So there have been lots of them.
Isabelle, is this just about celebrity now? The fact that when the Queen comes here, it's very similar to when she goes to the United States. There's a huge welcome. It's about the celebrity more than it is about the importance of the title and of the monarchy. I think you've lived in the UK as well, and it wasn't uncommon to see the Queen.
Yeah, my mum is actually English, so...
I thought you were going to say she's the Queen.
I like the jewellery, but I don't think I'm going to get anywhere near it. No, my mum is English though, so I should disclose. So there is half of me that is quite interested in the visit, and then there's half of me that's sort of unsure, the Australian half of me, obviously. I think it's a massively polarising issue, the monarchy in Australia, and the issue of celebrity, which Peter picked up on and you picked up on as well, is a really interesting one, because I watch Playboy bunnies being greeted at the airport, by huge crowds, in the goss pages,
Oh right,
and then no. But you see this footage of these celebrities who aren't really famous for anything other than reality shows, but the Queen actually does spend a huge amount of her time doing things like visiting hospitals and and doing a lot of
sort of
philanthropic. Exactly. So I think that a lot of the sort of anger that I see on social media platforms is a little bit unfair, considering the amount of airtime given to people who do a lot less. But I understand the people who don't want to have a monarchy, who want to be a republic and who feel anger for that reason. And they don't have to be interested. They don't have to visit her. They don't, or be at one of the events she's attending, or they don't have to. It's completely optional. There's no compulsory, Queen's Visit participation going on here.
Justin, are you a Republican or a monarchist, and will you be at Federation Square on Wednesday?
Staunch monarchist.
Really?
No, I'm kidding. I'm absolutely a Republican. I'm going to have to hold my tongue a little bit because this is, of course, a family show. But I in part, you might agree with what Isabelle's just said about celebs coming out here and people turning up and they don't really do anything at all. But the difference is, we're not paying for a Playboy bunny to come out here. Whereas we are all paying for the Queen to come out here, and that's my issue.
But we contributed to Oprah Winfrey coming out here as well.
But she made us money. The Queen is not making us any money.
Hey, we haven't seen any cash from Oprah yet.
How do you know?
Well,
I mean, I know the UK economy isn't doing brilliantly, but if the Queen's visit is being publicised on European television, then I would have thought that would do exactly the same for Australia's tourism as it would by showing Oprah Winfrey to American audiences here at Federation Square.
We have to move on.
Very quick reply. I wasn't supportive of the however many $1 million we spent on Oprah either. The fact that we spent it on her doesn't justify spending it on the Queen.
Well, how will you be heading to Federation Square, and will you be heading to Federation Square next week to see the Queen? Loretta Johns has this week's Your Say.
Well, the Queen will be in Melbourne next week as part of her 16th visit to Australia. We hit the streets to find out if Melburnians are going to turn out to see her and why she's so popular.
No, I haven't got the time to see the Queen.
Sorry?
I haven't got the time.
No time for the Queen?
No.
Because on Monday I'm going to Cairns. I would love to be here to see the Queen.
So you do like the Queen? You would turn out to see her?
The Queen, absolutely.
I probably won't. It's just time constraints and not overly interested in lots of crowds and things like that.
Probably not too interested. I can't see her relevance to today's Australia, so I probably won't be seeing her, no.
I'd love to go and see her. She's our monarchy. We're a monarchy.
I am working on and tied up in meetings all next week, but I would love to see the Queen. I think she's a fantastic lady. Reminds me of my mum.
Personally, not, but I understand that many people will be.
There's not a lot of love for the Queen.
She was quite an attractive young lady back in her time, though.
Thank you very much.
What a weird thing to say. And don't forget, you can tweet us at Melbourne Report or send us an email to melbourne@skynews.com.au. The Melbourne Report airs Friday at 2:30 Eastern on Sky News and across the weekend on the Melbourne Channel. Still to come on the program today, Occupy Wall Street protesters no longer occupy the city square. We'll hear what they have to say. The Melbourne Report returns after this. Welcome back to the Melbourne Report. I'm Ahron Young. A reminder of this week's panel: the Herald Sun social media editor Isabelle Oderberg, Channel 9 Melbourne's chief newsreader Peter Hitchener, and media lawyer Justin Quill. Thanks for joining us, guys. Agreement from the Premier and the Lord Mayor when it comes to the Occupy Wall Street protesters in Melbourne. It is time to move on. The protests in New York have been a huge success. There's, of course, an appetite for it after the global financial crisis. But were the protests in Melbourne really necessary? And, of course, did anyone notice? This morning, they were being removed by dozens of police officers. There was a 9 a.m. deadline to get out. But before that happened, Matt Gallant went along to find out what they had to say and why they were there.
I think it's really important that the 99% of us that want freedom want the 1% to realise that they're causing harm.
So how do you feel when the Victorian Premier and the Lord Mayor come out and say your message is across and it's time to move on?
They haven't stated what that message is that we've got across, and I feel as though I'm here not only with my own messages to bring, but I'm also learning what messages are coming out of this.
I don't think he's really heard. Like, if he actually heard and listened and he actually made some changes, that would be great. Then it'd be worth maybe moving to Treasury Gardens.
Indeed, he said our point has been made, and yet he didn't actually say what that point was. So I actually refuse to believe that as well.
If the Victorian Premier tries, or forces come and they try and move people along, what do you think will happen? I've spoken to someone earlier who's told me That they don't plan on moving on. What's your prediction?
I don't think that anybody wants to move from here willingly. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here in the first place. If the police were to come here, if the Lord Mayor was to try to evict us forcibly, there would be nobody resisting that in a violent way, because it doesn't serve the purpose of what we're here for.
We're not going to move, but they will take us away.
What would be your message to the Victorian Premier in relation to this particular protest?
Come down, talk to myself, talk to the other people who come here from work and go from here to work.
My message to the Premier would be let us stay.
Come and talk to me. I'd like to be able to talk to Bailoo.
Well, that is what the protesters think. Justin, is this just another protest, or do the Occupy Wall Street protesters here in Melbourne actually have a point?
I've got to say I've hardly noticed it. I work in the city and I've really not noticed the protest too much, so I've got to say I don't think they're really making much of a difference.
Is that because they're at City Square and no one's noticed City Square for about 20 years?
That's right. Maybe that is the case, but I do feel a little bit sorry for the retailers across from them who say it's actually affecting their business. So I do feel sorry for them, but I guess that's the point of a protest. I just haven't noticed it.
Peter, what are your thoughts on this? I mean, there's always protests, aren't there? Do you think this is just another protest, or do you think, given the anger that there has been towards capitalism, towards greedy paychecks for chief executives, for example, that there'd be a lot of people out there who'd be angry?
I'm sure it's born out of some kind of frustration, but I still don't quite know what they actually want to achieve from the protest. And in many ways, I think the protest would have sort of died a death and just would have petered out had it not been for the order that they move on. That's actually probably drawn more attention to it than anything else that's happened since they started to occupy the square. I'm not sure what they want to achieve. I don't think they've really articulated that. But it's clearly born out of frustration. People just not happy about the world, not happy about the financial system, feeling they don't have enough say in the way things are done.
Though?
But that's nothing new. It's always been like that.
And what are your thoughts, Isabelle? There's a lot of big signs about global corporations, American corporations in particular, the American presidency. Do you think that that's actually something that will a lot of Australians will look at and say, well, we agree or not?
Well, watching the scenes this morning, we've had the Herald Sun's had reporters there tweeting live, tweeting photos, and we're watching very closely to see. I completely agree with Peter that it isn't actually quite clear what they want. They seem to be. It's an extension of the Occupy Wall Street protests in America, but the American economy is fundamentally different to the Australian economy. The structural issues that the US is facing are not the same issues as we're facing here. In fact, comparatively speaking, the Australian economy is actually in very good shape. So you can't just simply draw a line and say, oh, well, we'll just extend it here, because they're asking for completely different things in the US. And I think that it sort of seemed like a good idea at the time. We'll go out, we'll exercise our democratic right, we'll express our unhappiness generally with economics and capitalism and society in general. But it leaves us all a little bit sort of flummoxed as to what is it that you actually want, what change do you actually want to see. And ironically this morning, the live stream that Occupy Melbourne had set up was preceded by an ad for McDonald's, on the live stream channel, which was, is utterly bizarre.
At least they got themselves some corporate sponsorship.
And I think that really clearly demonstrates a lot of the confusion. It's quite a nice metaphor for a lot of the confusion around this protest and what it actually does stand for.
Confusion, I think, is a great word, because there's probably a lot of people who have very confused ideas about what they're actually angry about. Are they angry with society? Do they want to be more like society? Are they angered that society hasn't given them what they need? Or, in fact, and I'll point this to you, Justin, do you think that perhaps these people don't actually know what they want?
I thought you were about to get stuck into lawyers again.
It's always a good time.
That's probably right. And I've got to say, I know I've been disagreeing all morning with Isabelle, but on this one I agree. I haven't really noticed it, and I don't think... I heard one of the protesters on the radio the other day saying, we're not moving until we get real change. Real change in what?
Change of clothes, perhaps?
Exactly. Maybe that's the idea. So I think there's some sort of fundamental issues with this protest. I'm all for people being able to protest, but
I agree.
Do you think their point is actually heard anymore by the wider society? I mean, they're saying that they want the Premier to listen to what they have to say, or perhaps for the Lord Mayor to listen to what they have to say. But do you think these days, when it comes to protests, people go, well, we know what you're protesting about, get a move on and stop causing havoc?
Yeah, look, maybe that's right, but you've still got to come back to... we're sitting here, the four of us sitting here right now, and if you asked us to articulate exactly what they want, what is the one thing or the main thing they want, we can't really do it. And I think that ultimately is a fundamental problem.
And even if you look at some of the issues that you know have drawn people in America to occupy Wall Street, even if you tried to sort of draw a distinct, you know, draw some sort of link between what's going on here and what's going on there, you can't, because the structural issues that the US protesters are trying to address, and that is to do with their banking system, to do with their health system, to do with, you know, things very specific to the US, you can't just transfer them across.
Well, if you've ever been to Melbourne, you'll know Melbourne's horse and coaches. They remind us of times gone by, but should they too become part of times gone by? The City Council seems to think so, as Lord Mayor continues to add bureaucracy to coach operators. Now they want to see bank statements and shift them to somewhere, but of course no one knows where. There is a real stench about this story, however, let's be honest, and it isn't coming from the town hall. Isabelle, is it time for these horses and coaches to pack up their coaches and head elsewhere?
Absolutely not. I believe that, you know, in Melbourne we don't have perhaps as many draw cards as you know, the Sydney Harbour Bridge or the Opera House and things like that.
But
and
is the smell of horse poo one of them?
You know what? It's really not that bad. Okay, I've walked in the city plenty of times and I've seen it. It's really not that bad. And I just think that, you know, I've seen so many tourists taking these rides up to the shrine and back, and you know, I think it's a really nice draw card for people, you know.
People, what do you think? Do they belong back in April 1970, picking up the Queen and taking her down Collins Street, or do they belong in peak hour traffic, as I think I've seen them sometimes?
Well, yes, I asked somebody in preparation for this segment, I said, what do you think of the horse and carriages? And she said, have you ever been stuck behind one in traffic?
They need a V8 engine, more horsepower.
Well, yes, look, I'm sure they're nice in Central Park and maybe, you know, in London or somewhere. And they're very picturesque in Melbourne. I'm not sure that they really are all that relevant today, but if tourists love them, as long as the animal welfare is looked after, I'm never too sure, you know, how it must be for the animals, you know, hauling those carriages up and down the hills and things. But
Justin, about 10 years ago I had some friends visit Melbourne from the UK, and they described Melbourne as a nice big old-fashioned country town. I was horrified. Do you think that the horse and coach is something we should really be? Should we be helping that view of Melbourne to international tourists, or should we perhaps be saying this is a modern city? If you want to go see that, we have lovely Sovereign Hill or we have Bendigo.
Well, look, with all due respect,
that's my opinion, of course.
With all due respect to your friends, I don't see Melbourne like that, and I don't think the average tourist sees Melbourne like that. So I don't think that's the issue that says we should move these horse and carriages on. I'm more concerned about the animal welfare side of things than anything else, but putting that to one side for a moment, if we assume that that's okay, I think we should all just relax a little bit. I know I've been stuck behind them in traffic before, and it's a bit annoying, but it's only an extra few minutes. And yeah, maybe it smells a little bit for the 2 or 3 seconds that you walk past it, but does it really matter? Ultimately, some people get some enjoyment out of it. If they didn't,
out of the smell, or
well, maybe. But if some people weren't enjoying it, they wouldn't be making any money. They wouldn't be able to operate. So they must be able to have some people enjoy them. So I think we should just all relax a little bit and let them do their thing.
And why is it that the City Council seems hell-bent on getting rid of them anyway? Looking back at our files, we have a story every few months about some move or other against them, and no one's actually quite said, well, what's the problem here? Are they causing significant traffic disruptions or something? I don't know.
And some of these families have been doing this for decades, you know, running these carriages. And of course, I really want to add, I totally agree about the animal welfare issue, but I'm not quite sure what it's
all right. Well, don't forget, you can write to us or tweet us. Send us an email to melbourne@skynews.com.au or tweet us at Melbourne Report. Now, though, it is time for final thoughts. Time now for final thoughts. We move along the panel. I'll start with you on this one. We've seen a lot of concerns about the Prime Minister curtsying. Do you think she should have?
No, I think you should do what you're comfortable doing, and she did what she was comfortable doing, and it was totally within protocol, and it wasn't disrespectful, and I have absolutely no issue with it.
Peter Hitchener.
Well, Julie Gillard took a briefing on it and was told that it was optional. She chose not to. That's it.
Justin, what are your thoughts? Because I've looked at this and thought maybe it would be a bit strange for a Prime Minister who is meant to hold a certain office to curtsy, but I mean, I'm not sure really where the idea of curtsying came from. Is a handshake enough?
Well, I'm not sure where it originally came from either, but I don't think she can have it both ways. I don't think we can say, let's bring out this person as our head of state, pay for them, and do it in the old traditional way, but then not greet her in the traditional way. So I think actually she should have, and that would have demonstrated why the Queen shouldn't be here.
If she doesn't have to curtsy, we shouldn't have to pay. Is that what you're saying?
Basically, yeah. You can't have it both ways.
You reach a certain age in the world and people start talking about when you might move on and things. There's talk about, someone's hand just went up behind the camera there. There's talk about this 150-year pill, that if you take this pill, you'll be able to work, maybe live for 150 years. Izzy, would you take it, and would you like to work for that long?
Absolutely not. I think you should live life the way it's meant to be intended, and when it's time to go, it's time to go.
Justin, what are your thoughts?
I'm more than happy to live for 150 years. I'm loving every day, so while Izzy's...
You'll be in the Supreme Court till you're 150?
Yeah, well, yeah, I'm not sure I'd like to work till I'm 150, but I want to live till I'm 150, maybe on a beach in the Bahamas somewhere.
And Peter, what are your thoughts?
Well,
the Bahamas somewhere? Or
I think it sounds like a wonderful idea. For St Kilda, we could bring back Robert Harvey for another 75 years or so. And as far as news reading, let it rip. I'll be ready to keep going as long as I can do it.
Thank you. Well, there we go. And it was great having you all come along this week, guys. Thank you so much. If you missed the whole show, you can catch us over the weekend on the Sky News Melbourne channel. Just point your remote to channel 600. We have a special mention for HMAS Cerberus, the open day down past Hastings this Sunday. It is open from 10 till 4. I'm Ahron Young. Have a great weekend.